Welcome to Donington Park and the second race of the weekend for the Radical European Masters. Tony Wells and James Littlejohn scored a victory in race 1 and they line up at the sharp end of the field for race 2. So it is Tony Wells who starts from pole ahead of Compadre and Alice. Then it's the Fergusons in third and Jim Booth in fourth before we get into the Supersport runners with Martin Verity and Ross Kaiser hopefully back on the grid after their race 1 dramas. So this should be entertaining. Tony Wells and Man Halals, who finished race 1, they are taking to the start for race 2. They've both got success seconds to contend with. We've got Jeremy Ferguson then, who is lining up just behind them, and also Jim Booth, who, true to form, was steadily progressing up through the order during the first race, and he should make a good getaway here in the RXC Spider as away we go now. 60 minutes of racing and already Alos looking to put the squeeze on Wells as they head towards Redgate for the first time, but Jim Booth in the blue machine to the outside line tries to swoop across, but it's Alos who gets the advantage and Booth challenges Wells as behind all sorts of problems. There's a spin there and that is Tom Harvey who's in trouble. We also saw Tom Gladys running out very, very wide as well as the survivors make their way down into the old hairpin. The spinners pick their way through the dust and rejoin the fray. I don't think we've lost anybody who's beached in the gravel trap, as meanwhile Jim Booth's lost plenty of ground through the course of this first lap. Yanni Herpia making good progress as, not surprisingly, at the sharp end of the Supersport class, Marco Cenchetti and Stuart Mosley will also be hoping to pick his way through as well. I think Mosley it is who's at the front of the Supersport class, indeed he is. And he's already found a way past Jim Booth. Booth trying to fight back on the brakes as Ferguson gets past Brian Caldwell. And this is something that we've seen a couple of times this year, that the Spider just takes, because it's got that quite broader contact patch, just a couple of moments longer to get the heat into the tyres, and it means that some of the fast starting Supersport cars can cause a little bit of hassle. In front of the field though, it is Alos who's got the advantage from Wells. A pair of them once more trying to break clear at the front of the field. Then in third place it's Stuart Mosley, fourth is Jim Booth, fifth Marco Cenchetti. Then we've got Ferguson and he has got Brian Caldwell tucked up just behind him already. Tom Gladys on the recovery charge. He has got Yanni Herpia. There's Herpia in the black 17 car about to be overhauled by Gladys. The dust-strewn car of Gladys, he had to take evasive action. We didn't quite see what happened there through Redgate as Herpia runs wide, kicks up the dust. But what you can see is that as we're racing at the height of summer, mid-August, the track probably well in need of a little bit of rain. It means that the runoff area is very, very dusty, and once one car runs wide, it kicks up a lot of dust into the path of the other drivers. So Caldwell under pressure from Gladys as tries to get onto terms climbing through Coppers and McLean's. The problem with Tom Gladys is that already Stuart Mosley and Marco Cenchetti have built up quite the buffer at the front of the Supersport battle. There you can see they're a good 4 or 5 seconds up the road. At the same time, Gladys will hope to dispense with Brian Caldwell fairly quickly, but Caldwell able to move across. He secures the line into the Fogarty S's. As now Gladys thinks about lining up move into the Melbourne hair, but he's not going to be quite close enough to challenge as the pair of them run through the Melbourne loop on this occasion. Then it's on towards Gollards, and again Gladys just looks at the inside of Caldwell. Caldwell consults his mirrors. He can see that Gladys is there. As the road falls away, Gladys knows that if he launches the inside, there's just the risk of understeering out wide. And Caldwell, unlike in the last stages of race 1, right bang on the line. Meanwhile, good move there from the rebadged and repackaged 25 car of Martin Verity. Verity, whose prime machine was damaged in that nasty incident at the start of the first race, but the Radical team, the Radical community, getting out onto the grid for this second race of the weekend. Also some good dicing going on behind as Tom Harvey, another early spinner, looks to make his way past Mohamed Jawa in the Saudi Falcons car. Again, that was an early casualty in race 1. And here is Tony Wells. Where is Matt Harrelson? Alice, in fact, beginning to build a little bit of a buffer over Wells. But of course, there are success seconds to consider as this race unfolds. 25 seconds of success seconds for Little John and Tony Wells. Manhals and Alex Capardia, they've got 35 seconds, and so that means that as long as Tony Wells can stay within 10 seconds Manhals, then it will feed James Littlejohn out in the lead of the race. All things being equal in the mandatory pit stops, of course, which come between 25 and 35 minutes of the race distance. Here then is the Supersport class leader, Stuart Mosley. Mosley and Ricardo Donner's chances dented with that contact with Marcello Maratiotto in race 1. And now the opportunity for revenge in race 2, particularly as Mosley is able to open up a little bit of a buffer over Marco Cencetti. Cencetti about to be challenged by the Spider of Jeremy Ferguson, but there was no way through for Ferguson as he looked into Redgate. Again, you just can't challenge too much to the inside at Redgate before they swoop down through the Craner curves. Now, Tom Gladys really on the march against Brian Caldwell. He's been a little bit frustrated behind Caldwell for a couple of laps longer than he would have liked. And it remains the case through the old hairpin, and this is always the challenge here at Donington Park, is there aren't that many hard braking points, and particularly in the SR3 where the braking distances are breathtakingly short. So it's a very brave move through Schwantz for Tom Gladys, brilliantly executed from Gladys. He had to reach deep into his locker and was able to get the run out of the old hairpin and use the momentum through Schwantz. Not an awful lot that Brian Caldwell could do about it, but those laps that Gladys lost behind Caldwell, now he has got a lot of ground to make up to Marco Cencetti. He has got clear road ahead of him and the opportunity to do just that. Darting through the Fogarty S's then for the two Supersport runners on towards the Melbourne loop once more. You can just see from the poise of Gladys's car, he's really pushing them. So see that Brian Caldwell possibly absolutely at the limit, just outbraking himself, slithering wide as he turned through the Melbourne hairpin on towards Goddard's. Here is the race leader, Manhal Alos, down through the Craner curves, and Alos will know that he's got more success seconds to contend with in the pits. He knows as well that Tony Wells will be able to pace his race to try and manage that, and therefore this needs to be a really rapid early stint from Alos. And we'd expect to see both of these drivers in the very moment the pit window opens in order to hand over to Alex Capardia and James Littlejohn. Then in third place, Stuart Mosley. He's got Jim Booth in fourth behind him. Booth currently the foremost of the Spider racers. And Jim, who we have seen moving ever more steadily towards the front of the field as the season's unfolded, now in a nice position to possibly be able to snatch an outright race podium from this one. It's going to be a good race-long tussle with Jeremy Ferguson. And the frustration for Jim is possibly he's going to be catching Stuart Mosley along the back straight, but then Mosley able to jink away through the corners, and it just is that level of distraction. It's the irritation for Jim Booth of seeing that car in front of him. The race leader, Manhalos, exits Goddard's to reel off another lap. There is Tony Wells in the background, and for my money, Wells a little bit closer possibly than when we last saw the pair of them. It's certainly not a 10-second buffer that Alos has got over Wells. And then the pair of them ever extending their advantage over Stuart Mosley and Jim Booth. And this a good opportunity for Booth, in fact, to move up ahead of Stuart Mosley. And he's able to do just that. Mosley forced to slot in behind him through Redgate. But now Mosley might be able to repass the Spider as they run down through the Craner curves. This is the fight for third place overall. Mosley secure in the lead of the Supersport class and several seconds up the road ahead of Marco Cencetti. And therefore, for Stuart Mosley, he doesn't want to overly force the issue here. Good scrap further down through the field, and that is Martin Verity, busy chasing Tom Harvey. Verity, who has come up through the full Radical Motorsport ladder, having started out in the entry-level Radical SR1 Cup, when he raced against a field that included such luminaries as the Olympic legend Sir Chris Hoy, who also made his first steps into motorsport through the SR1 Cup and has then progressed up through the Radical Racing ladder thereafter. Meanwhile, Booth has been able to hold off Stuart Mosley over the course of the lap, and Mosley now slipping into the clutches of Jeremy Ferguson as well. And this has been really nice driving from Jim Booth. The question mark, though, is going to be, is he overextending the tyres? Because it's a lot of racing around Donington Park, and we have seen throughout the course of the year that the Spider is an incredibly rewarding car. It's a very, very quick car. It is a car that really pays back if you're just able to look after the tyres in the first half of the race. It allows that spurt in the second phase. Ferguson thinking about lining up the move on Stuart Mosley into Redgate. He looks to the inside. Mosley swoops across, claims the outside line. This is a battle for position. It's not Lappery. And so Mosley going to try and defend from Ferguson if he can. Ferguson tries to force the door open, though, down through the crane of curves. Mosley gets his nose back in front, asserts the position for the old hairpin, and Ferguson going to have to replot, think of a different way to try and overhaul the SR3 RSX. And all the while, of course, Ferguson's main rival for that third place, Jim Booth, beginning to build a couple of seconds worth of advantage. So this trio battle is allowing the leading duo to break clear, as we just saw a puff of smoke a little bit further back. We'll try and pick up who that was momentarily as we track this battle for third, fourth and fifth. Down the back straight into the Faulty S's, and now looking to the inside, but Ferguson out breaks himself and traipses through the gravel trap, and a spin for Jeremy Ferguson. Very disappointing. He should recover though. I don't think he's lost the engine. Well recovered, in fact, because he got the car into gear and ready to go almost immediately. Spins up the tyres as he gets back into the action. Now here is a look at what was going on behind him. Yanni Herpia in all sorts of bother into the gravel trap. And is that race over for Yanni? I rather fear it might be. Certainly isn't getting much in the way of forward propulsion. He does now. And rejoins the gravel, though, without the benefit of recent rain. Might be a little bit stickier than usual. When it rains, it can sometimes be nicely compact and easier to drive out of than when it's dry. But Herpia on his way. Also in trouble, Mohamed Jawa in the Saudi Falcons entry. Both of them back into the race. Now the gap between the two leaders remains much as it was. Tony Wells just keeping Manhal Alos honest, and Alos trying a little bit too hard. Oh, and a mistake from Alos. He runs out to the curb. He's not going to lose the lead, but he's lost a couple of seconds there as the safety car comes out. Now, the safety car is going to do even more damage to Manhal Alos's lead. All of that buffer they built over Tony Wells whittled down to absolutely nothing, and this is a big problem for Alos and Kapadia, because, as we said, they've got those additional 10 seconds in the pits, and Alos have done a very good job of beginning to chip some of them away. But now, particularly if we have the safety car out for several laps, it's going to give advantage back to Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. It's also good news as well for Jeremy Ferguson. All that time that he lost from the spin is going to be recovered. Now, this is the reason for the safety car. Some fluid dropped on the circuit, which would possibly explain why we saw in trouble Yanni Herpia and Mohamed Jawa. And the safety car pulling back in now, and that is Alos who gets the power down nice and early with Wells behind him. Then Booth in third. The gap back to Stuart Mosley. And again, Mosley losing out a little bit, but we've lost Marco Cenchetti from the action. So disappointment there for Cenchetti and Maritiotto. Possibly it was an issue for Cenchetti which prompted the safety car to come out. But nonetheless, it's good news for Stuart Mosley and Ricardo Dona, particularly for Dona, with an eye towards the Supersport Championship. A non-score for Cenchetti and Maritiotto could be very helpful. Meanwhile, Tom Gladys also busy hustling Jeremy Ferguson. Ferguson will be very keen if he can to find a way past Stuart Mosley in fairly short order. And Ferguson also very glad to have regained all those seconds to Jim Booth that he lost as a result of that spin. They picked their way over the circuit dressing that was laid to the fluid that had been dropped, and I expect that that fluid is why we saw all those cars skittling off the circuit as Ferguson darts to the inside of Stuart Mosley. Another driver who will have benefited, second in the Supersport class, is Tom Gladys. Again, Gladys a victim of that first corner coming together, tripped through the gravel trap, lost a bunch of time, but now he has regained almost all of that. So we've got a well and true battle for the lead Supersport class. We've got a super fight between the Spiders for third, and the pit window is open. But they're not allowed to pit in until they've driven past the pit lane open board, so they can't come in as per the time. They've got to come in, so they've gone past the board, which they do now. So I think we'll see the pits abuzz in a few moments, but Stuart Moseley and Tom Gladys we would expect to see out until the very tail end of the pit window. The pair of them swing through Redgate down into the Craner curves once more in this fight for the lead of the Supersport class for 5th and 6th in the race altogether. Then 3rd in the Supersport class is Brian Caldwell. He has got Tom Harvey and Yanni Herpia tucked behind. So the fuel Bowser's getting ready. There is James Littlejohn poised to take over from Tony Wells. What we didn't see is whether Wells and Alos snuck past the start to finish straight before the pit lane open board came out. We'll find out momentarily, as meanwhile Jeremy Ferguson looks like the move on Jim Booth. This for 3rd place. Ferguson very brave to the inside into the Fogarty S's. Booth sees him coming and Ferguson has to back out of it at the last moment. Lovely dicing between the two drivers in the RXC Spiders, which really are the final step before moving up into sports prototype racing in the European Le Mans Series, as Stuart Moseley, able to invite himself to that party, moves ahead of Jeremy Ferguson through the Melbourne hairpin. Ferguson might be able to just power back past en route to Goddard's. Indeed he does. He has to get on the brakes, down through the gears. They swing through the adverse camber left-hander, as into the pit lane comes the race leader, Manhal Alos. This is to hand over to Alex Capardia. First of all, as Alos gets out of the car, the fuel's got to go in. Also in is Wells to pass over to Littlejohn. Now, the way the success seconds work out is that, barring any sort of issue in this pit stop cycle, we'd expect to see Littlejohn emerging from the pits 3 or 4 seconds ahead of Alex Capardia. Also in, we just caught a glimpse of Mohamed Jawa, and that is to hand over to Faisal Bin Laden. Bin Laden, who has been, again, one of the drivers we've seen in the Supersport class this year. Now, the weight is on Littlejohn and Capardia, both waiting to be waved back into the fray. And they're going to be waiting for a while as Littlejohn, he's creeping. Now he goes and gets into the action. And there follows Capardia about 2 seconds later. So this is going to be a really nice scrap between Littlejohn and Capardia, two of the quickest drivers in the championship. They've got Faisal Bin Laden, who emerges on a pitch just ahead of them. They've also come out into the midst of the Supersport class battle as Jim Booth ducks into the pit lane now. Brian Caldwell does battle with Tom Harvey, and that's just behind Alex Capardia. So this is going to be very, very busy, because the front runners have emerged essentially exactly a lap from where they left the circuit, and Littlejohn in particular, the battle between Tom Gladys and Stuart Moseley. He's got another 8 or so minutes to run until the very tail end of the pit window. Also into the pits is the Russian car of Konstantin Gurkaev. As Jim Booth waits for the signal from the mechanic, he rolls on his way. Gurkaev also about to be counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire it up and away you go. And that's been a good lap from Littlejohn, because he's clear of Stuart Moseley, and that means he's also clear of Tom Gladys. But it's Booth who is, with the benefit of the safety car and the absence of success seconds, who's going to emerge from the pits as the race leader. Meanwhile, Tom Gladys looks to scythe past Faisal Bin Laden. Bin Laden has absolutely none of it. Tries to squeeze Gladys through Redgate, but it's Bin Laden who loses out. He runs wide, kicks up the dust on the exit as the pair of them run down through the Craner curves. Meanwhile, Jeremy Ferguson moves to the inside of Konstantin Gurkaev at the old hairpin. So does James Littlejohn, and you'd have to say that Littlejohn has possibly had the run of the traffic a little bit more favourably than Alex Capardia since they emerged from the pits, and as a result, been able to put a few more seconds over Capardia. Littlejohn to the inside of Jeremy Ferguson. Ferguson determined to defend his position. Not be entirely clear with where they are all in sequence with regards to the pit stops. All he knows is he's got a Masters class car behind him. He's not going to make it at all easy for Littlejohn to find a way past. Now, the difference between the SR8 and the Spider is the SR8 maybe is a little bit more agile through the corner, but is certainly not as quick as the Spider in a straight line. Bin Marden. Meanwhile, moves clear of Konstantin Kakayev. I think that's a pass for position as well for Bin Laden. So he gains more ground in his pursuit of a Supersport class podium. Still a lot of racing to be done. We're just about at half race distance, and it is James Littlejohn who is chasing Jim Booth to lead the race. There is Alex Kapadia, who is able now to put that lap onto Tom Gladys, but it's been frustrating for Kapadia. He's lost, I'd suggest, about 7 or 8 seconds to James Littlejohn over the past couple of laps as they pick their way through the traffic. And given how he's evenly matched Kapadia and Littlejohn are when they're in clear air, that is going to be quite a gap for Kapadia to try and chip away at over the remainder of the race. Meanwhile, the pit lane getting very busy. Yanni Herpia, Wesley Fongenay and Brian Caldwell are all into the pits, as are the Harveys. Brian Harvey taking over from Tom Harvey for the second half of the race as Kapadia onto terms with Jim Booth. And Kapadia is going to dart to the inside of Booth into Redgate Corner. He makes the move stick, and that is good enough for second place then for Kapadia. Jim Booth gets shuffled down into third as Stuart Mosley finally comes in to hand over to Ricardo Dona. Mosley just clamps out the football area as Kapadia. There is his gap to James Littlejohn. There is Littlejohn just over the horizon, quite literally into Goddard's. And all the while they have got now Jeremy Ferguson, who I think has had his pit stop, has emerged possibly in the lead of the race. So this is for Littlejohn and Kapadia to chase down, as Ricardo Dona is going to rejoin just in front of the Peter Tyler and Tom Gladys car. Now, we didn't see the pit stop for Tyler and Gladys. We'll be able to see in a moment's time if it's the multicoloured helmet and the multicoloured car. Then we'll know that that is Peter Tyler behind the wheel as Kapadia exits the old hairpin. James Littlejohn chases down Ferguson. Then we've got Kapadia, who has in clear air been able to make some fairly decent inroads into the advantage that Littlejohn was previously holding. So this is not done and dusted just yet, and hopefully we're going to get the battle that we wanted to see between Kapadia and Littlejohn. Littlejohn's next target, though, is to overhaul Jeremy Ferguson in the RXC Spider, but it's this section of the circuit which really favours Ferguson. He can just plant his right foot, use the torque, and use the power of the Spider to rebuff the efforts of the SR8. It means that Littlejohn will have to work the car a little bit harder through the corners than he'd like. That in turn gives a little bit more of a tyre wear issue for Littlejohn, but he's now boxed in behind Ferguson. He might think about even challenging him to Goddard's. He knows that with Kapadia looming large, that he's going to have to try and force this move sooner rather than later, but he's not close enough to challenge Ferguson to Goddard's. Now watch as the Spider of Jeremy Ferguson just eases away from James Littlejohn along the straight, and it means that as they arrive into Redgate Corner, Littlejohn has to just sling it to the inside, try and force a move that's never really on. Now down through the Craner curves, this is where the two cars have got a little bit more in the way of parity. There's not an awful lot that Littlejohn can do en route to the old hairpin, and all the while, of course, Kapadia getting ever closer. And I'd suggest that Kapadia is currently 2 seconds lap quicker than the brace of cars fighting for the lead of the race. And Jeremy Ferguson, who has been in race leading positions already this year, is just going to stick to his guns. He's not going to make this easy for Littlejohn, but Littlejohn looks to be able to force the move to the inside line now, and he's going to lead the race, and through he goes. Great move from Littlejohn. He's finally able to take the advantage, and he does so just at the point, really, where Alex Kapadia was about to catch the train. But now, this is Ferguson's chance to retaliate down the back straight, but he can't use the torque of the Spider to be able to power past the SR8. So Littlejohn is able to make the move stick now for Kapadia. How quickly can he launch through? The answer is immediately to the inside at the Melville hairpin. Great move from Alex Kapadia, and one in terms of the overall narrative of the race that he absolutely had to make. So we could be in for a really thrilling conclusion. We've got a good 20 minutes of racing or so left on the clock, and this is now where Littlejohn and Kapadia are going to have to dig deep into their endurance racing experience, have to dig deep in terms of the levels of concentration, because when they're running as closely together as this, in cars as rapid as these, then the tiniest mistake is all that's going to be needed to throw the race away for either driver. Little John, who has been at the sharp end of Radical Racing for several seasons now, as indeed has Alex Kapadia. Wills and Little John have been a fairly stable driver pairing, and this year Alex Kapadia and Matt Halls, a new driver pairing for 2016, but it's one that's working really nicely. Now there's Peter Tyler, he's got Yanni Herpia just behind him. There is the Finnish driver in the black 17 car, and then Jim Booth behind the pair of them. And Booth really unlucky with the timing of that safety car, because it's rather hurt his chances of an outright race podium. As Herpia and Tyler do battle, this would be for a Supersport podium finish. At the moment, the thing that Herpia can do about finding his way past Peter Tyler, but Tyler, as he did in race 1, uses every inch of the road, as he's perfectly entitled to do. Meanwhile, the two leaders flying in tandem, and that gap doesn't seem to have changed at all, maybe by a tenth of a second or so, but no more than that since we last saw them. And the challenge as well for Alex Kapadia is these are aero-heavy, slicks and wings cars. Once you get to within about 3/4 of a second or so of your rival, you start to get into the turbulent air of the car in front. What that means is that you're having to really turn your way through a wake, and it unsettles the car on turn in. It means that you're using the tyres a little bit more, and to work the car a little bit harder just to close up to the car in front. Now there is Ricardo Donat, and Donat is at the front of the Supersport class battle. So the fight between Peter Tyler and Yanni Herpia for second in the Supersport class. And Herpia runs wide through Redgate Corner, kicks up another dust cloud, which Jim Booth is able to pick his way through. And that has cost Herpia probably about 1.5 seconds. It gives Peter Tyler just a little bit of breathing space, and that is possibly all that he needs, because when you've got a car right behind you, the temptation is just to drive by what's in your mirrors, not what you can see in front of you. I doubt that's a trap, though, that the race leader, James Littlejohn, is going to fall into. He knows that Alex Kapadia is there. He also knows that the second he starts to deviate from the racing line, turning into the corners a little bit sooner, just being a little bit more tentative on corner exit, that's the point at which Kapadia can look to close and pounce. So that they are closer. Kapadia is definitely easing up to the tail of James Littlejohn, and in terms of the time available, Kapadia has got time here to plot his move. He's not going to have to just do a late race lunge. He is able to close the gap against Littlejohn, but just look at Littlejohn's. They turn through Redgate Corner, down the Craner curves. Kapadia closing up onto the tail of Littlejohn. He's within about 3 or 4 tenths of a second as they then hook up out of the old hairpin, use the camber of the circuit before they climb through Schwantz. Coppers and McLean, the next challenge, the two right-handers. In particular, it's the second which is so tricky because you can't see the corner before you have to turn into it. You're turning in just as you arrive onto the tabletop, taking on trust that you've got your turn in right. But the exit is so important because it feeds onto the longest straight on the circuit, down towards the Fogarty S's. And Kapadia just letting the car move a little bit under braking. Both of these drivers, very experienced at this level, letting the car do all the hard work, minimising the steering input, and in turn that is minimising the pressure that's being put onto the tyres, and therefore giving them a little bit more grip and traction to play with as they head towards the latter stages of the race. This is absolutely fascinating as a duel because you just get the sense that Kapadia has maybe got a slightly quicker car underneath him. Littlejohn was just struggling to get it hooked up through Goddard's then, in quite the same way that Kapadia was, but unless Alex Kapadia is a good 2 or 3 seconds a lap quicker, then Littlejohn might well be able to hold him off. This is when it starts to get very nervous in the pit lane as well for Tony Wells and Manhal Alos. These are really the two preeminent cars in the championship for the 2016 campaign, and they're doing battle wheel to wheel around Donington Park in this second race of a triple header Radical European Masters weekend. Almost every metre for James Littlejohn, every second is a second closer to the checkered flag. Kapadia, you can just see he's hovering at that point where he's really going to start to be affected by the turbulent air coming from Little John's car in front of him. Expect that Capaldi will know that he's probably got the opportunity to open up 2 or 3 chances to challenge between now and the end of the race. He's going to, for the time being, just sit there, hold station, see if he can force Little John into a mistake. See what Little John is doing as well. Which corners is he strongest at? Which corners is he struggling slightly? And therefore begin to plot his move, because often you see these drivers setting up an overtaking manoeuvre several corners in advance. And last time around we saw Little John just taking a slightly different line through Goddard's, as well as Capaldi. Not on that occasion. Meanwhile, here is Ricardo Donor at the front of the Supersport class. He's got Jim Booth running behind him. This also the fight for 4th and 5th place in the race overall, and that was a fairly brief fight, wasn't it? Because Jim Booth able to ease clear of Ricardo Donor. I don't think he'll be too worried by that again, because he will be keeping an eye on the championship points position, particularly with Marchiotto and Cencetti having issues in race 1 with that contact that led to them being demoted, and now retiring in this second race. It's a great opportunity for Ricardo Donor to continue to rack up the championship points. But he will also be cognizant that he's got Yanni Herpia just beginning to loom in his mirrors, and there is the Finnish driver Herpia, who has had, again, a very consistent season, a driver we've seen out to play on most occasions. Then a good scrap behind, that's between Peter Tyler and Faisal Bin Laden, and that is going to be for 3rd in the Supersport class. So lots of battles to be resolved between now and the checkered flag. We are beginning to creep a little bit closer to the end of the race. Jim Booth's next target, meanwhile, is Jeremy Ferguson. Let's expect that Jeremy just a little bit too far up the road. Once more we return to the fight at the front of the field, and exactly as it was when we left it, really. Alex Capaldi no closer to James Littlejohn, but Littlejohn at the same time unable to do anything about shaking the toe of Capaldi, who's just beginning to show himself now in Littlejohn's mirrors, trying to force the mistake. Just that momentary lapse in concentration. You can see how hard Capaldi is trying. Every single corner exit, the opportunity just to get the slightest advantage over Littlejohn. Maybe force the mistake into the old hairpin, maybe force him to run wide, get on the throttle a tenth of a second later. That's the sort of opening that Capaldi needs. For Ricardo Donor, he just needs to hold station and try and stay with Jim Booth, but there is Yanni Herpia. Herpia coming ever closer to his tail. Finnish driver negotiates the Melbourne hairpin. A pair of them coming towards the end of another lap. Over the crest of the road, and what you maybe don't get quite the sense of from the television pictures is how much this Donington Park circuit undulates, particularly as you come out of Redgate through Hollywood and down the Craner curves. The circuit really falls away into the bottom of the valley and then comes up to the tabletop section, which is where you've got the back straight and also the start and finish straight as well. Around Redgate, Yanni Herpia trying to close onto terms with Ricardo Donor. This the fight for the Supersport class lead. A pair of them swing into the old hairpin once more. Again, Herpia trying to just find any sort of additional advantage to try and chase down Ricardo Donor, but at the moment there is none forthcoming. It means that Donor is able to maintain that buffer of 3 or 4 seconds over the Finnish driver as the pair of them run out of St McLean's on to the back straight and then towards the Fogarty S's. And it seems as if Herpia just maybe got the advantage over Ricardo Donor through some of the quicker corners, and particularly the exit onto the long straights, but then Donor possibly able to retaliate through the Melbourne hairpin and Goddard's. All the while though, in 4th place, Jim Booth not really romping clear. At the same time, Booth is some way adrift of Jeremy Ferguson, best part of 30 seconds or thereabouts, and therefore he doesn't need to unduly risk the car. 4th place is a perfectly respectable result, as now the fight for 3rd in the Supersport class getting very close between Faisal Bin Laden and Peter Tyler. We just saw a glimpse of the pair of them running in tandem as they came through the Melbourne hairpin. So we've got the first 2 pairs really in the Supersport class having a great scrap as now Tyler has to get his elbows out, has to keep the Saudi Falcons car behind him. Bin Laden looks to the inside of Tyler. Nothing doing into Redgate. But Tyler just turning in a little bit earlier than perhaps he would have wanted. And Bin Laden riding in tandem behind him. But again, it comes down to, can the Saudi Arabian driver pick his way through that turbulent air given out from the tail of Peter Tyler's car? Can he be able to force the move, to be able to pick his way past with such a short braking zone? And that is the challenge for him as we are now heading towards the latter stages of the race. They're going to have time probably for 4 or 5 more laps at most. That means that Bin Laden is just getting to the stage where he might just have to force the issue a little bit. He's had a superb run onto the straight now, and this is the best opportunity that Bin Laden has had so far. And doesn't Peter Tyler know it? He just leaves less than the car's width the inside of the Fogarty S's and then chops across the door. And that is beautifully defended from Peter Tyler. And there was nothing really that Bin Laden could do. He could have maybe forced to the inside, but it would have risked contact. And again, into the Melbourne hairpin. Tyler covers the inside line. He's going to make Bin Laden do this the hard way. Try and find the way around the outside of him. And maybe try and force the mistake. Just a quick consultation in the mirror there from Peter Tyler. He looks to see if Faisal is able to challenge him to the inside line at Goddard's. He's not quite close enough. So the pair of them come out of Goddard's along the start-finish straight into another lap as the bright green Saudi Falcons car of Faisal Bin Laden challenges Peter Tyler for third place in the Supersport class. And you just saw in the background as well that James Littlejohn and Alex Capardia, the race leaders, are about to catch this battle and are very likely to do so between now and the checker flag. So this could be absolutely fascinating as the race leaders about to home into view. Here they come. No change in the order, no change really in the gap between the leading duo either. But you can rest assured that they are both absolutely on the limit of what the car is able to offer them. You can almost see the rear wings just begin to flex as Bin Laden launches the inside of Peter Tyler. And that's a great move there from Faisal Bin Laden. He is elevated to third place in the Supersport class. Now what, by way of a response, has Peter Tyler got as they run down the back straight once more? Got the race leaders closing up as well. That will potentially disturb this fight for third in the Supersport class. It will also potentially disturb the fight between the leading duo with just a couple of minutes left on the clock. Littlejohn and Capardia running in tandem. And this is the last thing that James Littlejohn would have wanted, is not so much to catch the back marks. If you catch one on their own, that is fairly straightforward. It's to catch two cars that are busy dicing on probably the trickiest circuit on the calendar, maybe with the exception of Estoril, to actually, for the Masters class cars to find their way past the Supersport runners. It's one of the beauties of this championship that you've got two such distinct classes. It means you really do have two races in one, but it does make it very tricky when you get to a situation like this where you've got two dices overlapping with each other, and Littlejohn having to be ruthless. He sides past Peter Tyler, and all credit to Peter, he didn't interrupt that fight for lead at all. The next target has been Laden. It opens the door for Alex Capardia, who challenges Littlejohn into the old hairpin. James Littlejohn defends as running out very wide, kicking up the dust was Bin Laden. This is going to be quite the sort out as they come into Sheen, and Littlejohn has come through past Bin Laden, so's Capardia, and in fact Faisal Bin Laden ran so wide at the old hairpin that Peter Tyler has also reclaimed third in the Supersport class. And now the mistakes begin to creep in as we get late into the race. A beautiful slide from Capardia. He is absolutely 100% on the limit. That run into the old hairpin was maybe the best opening that he's had so far, but it's allowed him to gain another couple of tenths of a second on Littlejohn as they jink out of the Fogarty S's, come over the crown in the road, down towards the Melbourne hairpin. The checker flag getting ever closer, and it means that Alex Capardia is beginning to run out of options here as they run towards Goddard's. It's the only corner really we've seen even the slightest of errors from James Littlejohn, and this time it's the turn of Capardia to make the mistake. He runs wide and just costs himself a tenth of a second or two as the pair of them sprint through into the final lap of the race as they head towards Redgate corner. And that tiny mistake from Capardia means he's got ground to make up, and then he's got to try and force the move on James Littlejohn. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to do it, because It's about half a second or so that he really needs to close on Little John, and then he needs to make the move stick. And at the moment, almost a third of the way through this final lap, he's not been able to make that move yet on Little John. Or rather, he's not been able to close that ground to make the move on Little John. And so that is the first thing that Capaldi needs to do. Meanwhile, here is the battle between Yanni Herpia and Ricardo Dona. This is for the lead of the Supersport class. They've got Konstantin Gudkaev as well, just up the road ahead of them. Dona, though, sticks to the racing line. I don't think he feels that Herpia is quite close enough to challenge. Indeed, he's not. And also, the good news for Little John is that he is not going to close up onto the tail of the Supersport class leaders. Between now and the flag, more problems for Faisal Bin Laden. He runs wide, and that takes away any chance of third place in the class, having challenged Peter Tyler into the Melbourne hairpin for the final time. It's been a brilliant race, this, between James Littlejohn and Alex Kapadia, and it looks as if it's going to be Littlejohn who will take his second victory of the weekend in the Radical European Masters, as Kapadia locks his brakes deeply into Goddard's, but it's to no avail, and it's a double win for James Littlejohn and Tony Wells. They take the checkered flag for the second time at Donington Park, with Alex Kapadia and Manhalos completing the second step of the rostrum once more. But still, there is this Supersport battle to be resolved, because they've snuck through into the last lap of the race ahead of the race winners. Jeremy Ferguson is well set for third, but who is going to win the Supersport class? Will it be Ricardo Dona? Will it be Yanni Herpia, as the pair of them swing out of Schwanz? I don't think they're going to catch Konstantin Gudkaev over the course of this last lap, which will be good news for Ricardo Dona. Maybe not such good news for Yanni Herpia, because it takes away a golden opportunity for him to challenge, as Dona just makes the slight mistake as they head on to the back straight, and Herpia draws alongside as they're going to run side by side now towards the Fog TS's. Herpia just then slots in behind Dona, but he's determined to think about the move into the S's for the final time. But Dona again just able to get his car in front, only by a third of a car's length, but it is enough to keep the Finnish driver at bay. Herpia can't challenge either into the Melbourne hairpin. He just seems to be a little bit less confident on the brakes than Ricardo Dona, unless he's going to go for an all or nothing move into Goddard's for the final time. But Dona has it covered. Herpia thinks about the move. He closes right up to Ricardo Dona, retouches Ricardo Dona and turns him into the spin, and Yanni Herpia is going to take the checkered flag, an on-the-road victory in the Supersport class. But I somewhat fear that that is going to be reversed in post-race scrutineering, as Ricardo Dona comes over the line in second place in the class. Well, dramatic conclusion to both the Masters class and Supersport class races, and some brilliant dicing here at Donington Park. Ricardo Dona is going to leap back round to the pits. As I say, I think that once the race director looks at that, it might be reversed. For now, though, this is how they finished on the road. So Littlejohn and Wells taking the win from Kapadia and Alos, then Jeremy Ferguson in third, Jim Booth in fourth, and Herpia claiming fifth on the road in the Supersport class victory. So into the third step of the rostrum for Jeremy Ferguson. Runners up, Manhal Alos and Alex Kapadia. Kapadia tried everything he could, but he couldn't quite find the way past James Littlejohn. So therefore, it's smiles all around for the second time this weekend for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn as they take the win. Will Brown from Radical doing the honours with the presentation of the trophies. Still a third race to come.
I knew I had a bit of a gap in after the pit stops, but I think Alex sort of either managed the traffic a bit better or got the better of the traffic and closed up to the back of me. But I knew as long as I didn't make one mistake, it's very difficult to pass here. There's a lot of high-speed stuff, and with the aerodynamics and the way the car works, when you're following someone else, you get a lot of aero wash, as we call it. So I knew as long as I didn't make a mistake, it would be very difficult for him to pass.
We just couldn't quite get close enough. Every time you get that little bit too close, the front loses downforce. So managed to catch James, but just wasn't quite enough. It was really frustrating, but it was exciting too.
Onto the Supersport podium then, and third place for Tom Gladys and Peter Tyler. Runners up Stuart Mosley and Ricardo Donut. And then on to the top step of the rostrum for Yanni Herpia. All smiles on the podium. There's more trophies to collect.
When you did your pit stop, there was a lot of gravel came out from under your car.
Yes, because I went like 200 meters in the gravel, so it was the whole race. It was sound of rocks in the car.
Well, not unsurprisingly, the post-race adjudication from the race director did indeed reverse that Supersport class order, so it was the win for Ricardo Donut and Stuart Mosley from Yanni Herpia, then Tom Gladys and Peter Tyler. Well, we're all set for the third and final race of this Donington Park Radical European Masters race weekend.